All right. Hi, all. Thank you for joining. We're excited to have you all here for this event. My name's Christy, and I'm the co-director of events for Out for Business. And just a general overview of the club, Out for Business is an LGBTQ plus club at the David Eccles School of Business. We are a professional development and community outreach group that develops relationships, resources, and education among faculty, staff, students, and companies for the benefit of LGBTQ plus students and allies. For this event, we have 4 panelists from different companies who are going to discuss questions about being LGBTQ plus in the workplace. I'm going to hand it over to Brian, the Executive Director for Out for Business, to start this event off.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Christy. I hope everybody is having an absolutely wonderful, what is it today, Tuesday? Quarantine time is all skewed. But to kick us off, I'd love to see where everybody's calling from. I'd love if you could use the YouTube live stream chat below and let us know, 1, where you're calling in from, and then 2, what has been your favorite quarantine activity. For me, it's been bird watching, strangely enough. I just have a pair of binoculars and I just sit outside my window all day. Wonderful. It seems like we have people tuning in from all over, which is really, really exciting. Hope you're staying safe and healthy. But our goal today is to illuminate what unique challenges face LGBTQ plus individuals within the workplace and how we can work together to remedy them, both as members of the community as well as allies. And we're incredibly excited and honored to have some wonderful guests with us today to discuss. We have Diraj Chand from the University of Utah, Timothy Anik from Toyota, Brianna Caruso from the University of Utah Health, as well as Kelvin Brock from Adobe. If you guys wouldn't mind introducing yourself with your pronouns, your role in the LGBTQ plus community, a bit about who you are and what you do for work, as well as your favorite quarantine activity as well. Can we go ahead and start with Diraj?
Hi everyone, I'm Diraj Chand, he, him, his pronouns, and I work actually here at the University of Utah in advancement. That is the fundraising arm for the university. And I focus on principal and major gifts for the university. My favorite activity during quarantine, aside from wearing yoga pants, is I love TV and I love karaoke. And it's hard to karaoke online, but there's a bunch of online communities and there's an app called House Party and it's been a lot of fun to do some of that and be social, even though we're distant.
Wonderful, thank you. Tim, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Tim Anik. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am gay male, cis male, and I am a planner at Toyota Motor North America, which is a long way of just saying, Toyota, the company. I love cars. I'm a car guy. I've always been a car guy. And so my quarantine activity has been finding scanned brochures of cars from the 50s and 60s and comparing them to the work I do now. There's pretty stark differences.
That is pretty neato. Brianna, would you like to go next?
All right, everybody, let me get my camera on. So my name is Brianna. My pronouns are she and her. I started working at the University of Utah at the beginning of COVID, so it's been a little crazy. I started at the end of March. I am the department manager for the group in population health. I identify as a proud gay woman. I actually just married my wife about a month ago. So that is me. I would say that my favorite quarantine activity is probably indoor cycling in my house. So.
Congratulations. That's so great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then next, Kelvin. Kelvin, can you hear us? Are you there?
Oh, I apologize. I thought I had unmuted myself, but apparently not. I don't typically use Zoom. We use a different technology, so I apologize. Can you hear me now?
Can hear you great.
Okay, perfect. So Kelvin Brock, pronouns are he, him, his. And as far as role in the LGBTQ community, do a lot of different activities with nonprofits in our local community that are focused on the LGBTQ plus community. And that's wonderful. That's facilitated through my role at Adobe. My day job at Adobe is actually a director of recurring revenue programs and operations, blah, 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 right? It has to do with making sure we renew our big enterprise contracts. And so I have an operations teams in India, as well as some program management teams that focus on that effort. Personally, I should also say I lead I'm a co-lead for this site employee network called Pride at Adobe, which is for our LGBTQ plus employees and allies. Personally, I am from North Carolina, have lived in Utah half my life though now. I will apologize and say I came here initially and graduated from BYU. Whoops, sorry about that. But now I'm married to my husband. I got married in 2013. We were married during the 2-week period when you could marry before marriage equality was announced a couple of years later nationwide. So we've been together 16, 17 years and married coming up on 7. So I think I did my math right. That is me. As far as quarantine activities, we are spending time back and forth. I'm in San Diego currently and walking our dog. We do lots of walking our dog during quarantine.
Almost congratulations on your anniversary.
Thank you.
I'd love to invite all of our panelists to turn on their cameras at this point and we can jump right into questions. We have a wonderful hour full of questions. Let's jump right in. So for LGBTQ plus individuals in the workplace, I know we can share this experience. A lot of us are kind of unsure about when to come out in the workplace, right? Often we enter a job, sometimes still closeted. Could you tell us about the first day of your career versus the first day you were out about your identity in your career and what the differences between those were?
I can begin. So one of the things that when I began my career, I started at Volkswagen, another car company. And I think the first day I just remember as being, I kind of black out in stressful situations and I don't remember anything. And I would say that it's a blur, but I remember being really sweaty. I think it's always stressful to meet new people and it's particularly exhausting and stressful to start in a new place. And I think, coming out of college, I felt like I had to learn a completely new lexicon and ways of working. And that's exhausting and it takes some time. And so don't be too hard on yourselves, particularly on the first day. And I think, being out at work, I think that there are different ways to do it. I think some people come in and they're out at work. And I think some people kind of will come out kind of to those who they work with as it comes up. And so that was a path I took. I never felt, I've been fortunate in the sense that I've worked for 2 car companies that rank pretty high up on, I think, the HRC ranking of best places to be out at work. I don't remember exactly what the ranking is for each company, but always have felt safe. And I think that, you should come out, at what is the best kind of path for you, whether that's on the first day. And I think that's great. Or, come out to your colleagues as it comes up, which is another good path.
I can comment as well. I mean, times have changed a lot since I first joined my career. I mean, back when I first finished college and my first company was a local company, very, very conservative. And I would say that I didn't come out. I was very closeted for a long time, honestly. And I was transitioning. I came out to my family and to myself really in my mid-20s. So in my first career, I was not out at all. I'll focus on the positive and say, when I did come out, what a difference that made. And the environment that allowed me to do that really fully and completely from a career perspective was at my current company at Adobe. It's a work environment. We're a creative company. We firmly believe that creativity thrives in a diverse workplace. And so, one of our core values is actually be genuine. And how can you be genuine? And if you're not your authentic self at work? So I will say that, little things, coming out doesn't have to be a big dramatic event. It's the little things. I reference my husband in casual conversation commonly. You'll get the occasional shock or a look. I think people make assumptions about who you are in your life. And just in casual conversations, as you reference your life and you're genuinely you, every day is a coming out experience. And I will say it has been absolutely wonderful. Very rarely do I have a negative response to that. Quite often, I will actually have someone, be very, very supportive and recognize me as a gay person in a very, very positive way.
Yeah, and I would have to agree. I mean, I'm just thinking about when I first came out, I was in my early 20s. At the time, I was working at the U as well. And so I felt very lucky to be a part of such a great group. But the hardest thing for me is I dated men most of my life. So I think that was the hardest thing for me was just trying to explain that. And I kind of felt like I constantly had to explain that piece of me. And I just felt like that part was probably the hardest, just because I felt like it was just hard to explain to a person who doesn't understand it, because I just felt like I wasn't being my true self. So I just think just be easy on yourself. And if you don't feel like it's the time to come out, then that's okay.
I want to echo my fellow panelists as well. For me, I was very lucky. I started as a student activist here on campus. And so working on anti-racism work, but also LGBTQ issues on campus. And so I was very lucky to sort of be out, and I work currently at the University of Utah. I just sort of never left really since I was a student here. And so I was really lucky to sort of have that experience. What's really interesting is that I meet with donors and with a broad spectrum of political backgrounds, personal ideologies, different views. And I think early on in my career, I focused a little bit more about making people feel comfortable and not disclosing too much of myself. And not that I wasn't out, but I sort of dipped my toe a little bit just to see where they were. And now I feel like I've developed some tools to be a little more authentic. And that's actually resonated with donors of really all kinds of backgrounds. The more authentic you are, the better you're able to connect with people on just a human level. And that's really critical to fundraising and donor work. At the end of the day, though, I will always consider myself as an activist first, and as a DEI practitioner, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And higher ed is really a vehicle to do that work. So at the end of the day, I think there are varying degrees of coming out, and we're always going through a continual process of what that looks like. I echo everybody in saying just be kind to yourself. That's one of the hardest things. And it's one of those things that you need a constant reminder throughout your career, is just be kind to yourself as you're going through that process.
I love that. And I really want to appreciate highlighting importance of authenticity in the workplace here, showing how much value it brought to not only your own personal well-being, but also to the work you do. And I also want to highlight, Dheeraj, exactly what you just said about being kind to yourself and being patient with yourself as you go out. Everyone has different journeys and timelines. I'd love to jump to our next question. What can allies do? What can allies do, whether they're coworkers or managers? What can they do in their positions to help create a more inclusive and welcoming workplace for LGBTQ plus individuals in the workplace? And what does a good ally look like to you?
I can start off there if you'd like. We have some really, really wonderful allies. Our network, our employee network at Adobe, the Utah site is close to 200 people. And our site has, I'm going to say 1,500 employees. I can't remember anymore. We haven't been into the office for a year, so it's hard to know. I think we're like 1,500 employees, but we have a couple of hundred people in our network, and the majority of them are actually allies. So a couple of things I would mention is, presenting your pronouns like we did as we introduced ourselves today. That shows that you are an ally, that you're comfortable recognizing the importance of pronouns. Using non-gendered language, I think, is very, very important. And it's sometimes a transition to force yourself or to help yourself practice that. but just little things like instead of referring to a wife or a husband, referring to a spouse or a partner as you're having conversation with someone, your spouse or your partner. It's non-gendered language that allows your colleagues to feel as though you recognize them and that this is a safe place. You're a safe person to be talking to about themselves and who they are. The other thing I would mention is speaking up when you hear demeaning language or terms being used, when you hear demeaning conversation, even if it's not used in a malicious way. If it is in some way derogatory or demeaning to the I said that wrong, LGBTQ plus community, speak up. And again, that creates a safe space. And the final thing I would say is just educating yourself. Don't rely on your LGBTQ plus colleagues or friends or family to educate you, but educate yourselves. There's so many things out there with podcasts and books and allied groups through our Pride Center and our local nonprofits that support the LGBTQ plus communities. So be involved. Again, I'm going to keep plugging the Adobe core values. That's another Adobe core value is be involved. Be involved in the community, and that's the best way, frankly, to be an ally.
So I think one of the things, similar to what Kelvin was saying, I think, each company has a set of core values. So at Toyota, it's respect for people. And I found kind of the best way for me to kind of advocate for allyship is for me to be an ally for other groups. So that means, when you started a company, figure out what all of those employee resource groups look like, join them, be an active participant. This is, as Kelvin said, you educate yourself, but this is a really easy and great opportunity where this education is handed to you. These events these events will be places where people share their opinions and perspectives and experience. And it's a really great opportunity for you to kind of step out of the bounds of maybe your day-to-day perspective. So I have found, as a member of our Spectrum is our employee resource group for LGBTQ individuals. When I am present in these other groups, these other ERGs, I find that there's actually a pretty strong ROI. People are then, more inclined to be present at ours.
I love that both Kelvin and Tim talked about core values and their company's core values and how they're able to sort of use that to be better allies and engage in this work meaningfully. When I was thinking about this question, I just jotted a few things down, and I thought about, well, I have very clear examples of what are bad allies and mediocre allies. So these are just some of the things that I've noticed sometimes that I think everyone can work on. And I say mediocre ally because I think that we all can, if we're not continually growing and learning, we sort of default into mediocrity. And so some of these things aren't necessarily egregious by itself, but I do think it sort of lends itself to not being so great of an ally. But I would say people who are know-it-alls and think that they can speak for another person's experience, bad listeners, or people who won't stop talking when they're claiming they want to learn something. People who continually question other people's experiences and not in a way that's validating or seeking understanding, but it's more of a way to debate and discredit. Kelvin mentioned this, but people who refuse to educate themselves and sort of expect LGBT people to do that for them. People who ask LGBT people to speak for all groups. And then I would say folks that don't show up for important issues and causes. And on kind of the flip side of that, people who do show up but take up a lot of space and don't really honor or respect that space. I would also just mention too that I think it's really important when we talk about any of the isms or anything around diversity, equity, and inclusion that we are looking at an intersectional lens. I tend to focus a lot on anti-racism work, but for me, I can't, and this is my philosophy, I can't be an anti-racist if I'm not fighting against patriarchy or if I'm not fighting against ableism. I think those things all have to sort of coexist. And so being able to have that ability to maybe unpack things in a little more complicated way in the intersections is it can really make an amazing ally.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, I just think that it's just so important, and I think that we'll get to this in the chat, but I think that when a person sort of sees you as like their token gay friend, I think that that's a thing too, where it can be very hard. I think especially when you have just come out, because at that point in time, you don't. I mean, me, I felt like I didn't feel like I knew how to be gay, and so I just feel that just being able to be open, and I think that a person that's able to just sit down and just hear us, I think is probably one of the most important things for me. So
I would make just one more comment. I loved kind of the theme that evolved there from what everyone said is about, being an ally yourself for other communities. I mean, I just personally, that struck a chord because, everybody kind of mentioned it, and it makes you so much more aware of those around you. It is so richly rewarding when you do that because you learn so much from other communities. That's why diversity is wonderful, right? It gives you an opportunity to learn something that you may not learn on your own as you engage with and work with a diverse group of people. Adobe for All is our overarching community that encompasses, Pride at Adobe, Hispanic at Adobe. There's different groups of minority communities, if you will, that have employee networks, but they're all under this Adobe for All umbrella. And I have found that to be so rewarding and educational for me. And that's how you are an ally. So appreciated that theme through the conversation there.
I think I just want to highlight, I really loved hearing you guys discuss about what an ally looks like and what that can really mean in a workplace. I want to highlight that theme of showing up there for other communities, right? I think that's so huge. And also the act of learning and listening. I want to acknowledge everybody who's watching right now, especially allies that are watching right now, that they are doing the right thing of sitting here and listening and being here. Like, you've taken the first steps, and I just want to acknowledge that. I hope you take that and go listen in on other communities as well, right? And understand the intersectionality and how they play in. And Brianna, I saw you mentioned tokenism. I think that's such a huge topic here. I think that acts as a great segue into my next question. In your opinion, what does authentic diversity and inclusion practices in a workplace, like, what do they look like compared to those policies that might be patronizing or tokenizing or inauthentic? What did those look like to you?
I can go first again, and I hope I'll be able to answer your question, Brian. I mentioned Adobe for All committees. I mentioned some of the things that we do in my workplace to try to make it not patronizing, to try to not, it is about being for all. It is not about this is a community, this is a community, and this is a community. We are a community, and we're a diverse community, all of us together. The effort that we go to try to make that happen includes bringing in outside speakers, doing film festivals. It's kind of building allyship I guess it's almost in a subtle way, because they're just diverse events, fun events. Pride for us even has just become this big party at Adobe. We had about 300 plus people march with us in the last Pride parade. And the vast majority of those are allies, families. I remember the first time I got an executive to come to Pride, and he asked the question before, he's like, am I okay to bring my kids to Pride? And I'm like, well, yeah, you're great. That's great. Bring your kids to Pride. After that parade, he came up to me with his wife and said, this is the best thing I have ever done. It was such a party, and they have come every year since, he, his wife, and their kids. So it's not necessarily, to avoid that tokenism, if you will, making it feel separate. It's about making it not feel separate. It's all of us in this together. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that addresses your question from my perspective, Brian.
I love that. I love that.
I could say an example is I think with the passing of George Floyd, and I focus on higher education. Higher ed went through an interesting time around equity, diversity, and inclusion, because I think a lot of higher ed would consider themselves, a lot of higher ed institutions are kind of on the forefront of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think it was a bit of a reckoning when you look at a lot of the reporting and a lot of what the students were sort of charging universities with. It was that we were incredibly reactive around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we weren't necessarily proactive. So I think a really good example of kind of doing it the right way is just sort of being proactive and consistent with your efforts, and it's not just sort of always reactive and when things sort of bubble up. Students have demanded and asked that universities respond to anti-racism work in a way that we just haven't seen. About 1 out of 3 young people between the ages of 18 and 33 have given to a Black Lives Matter or an anti-racist cause in the past few months. That's higher than really any other cause. So I think about what incredible activists we have as students, and how are our institutions and our companies sort of looking at, okay, we've got a new generation of incredibly thoughtful, critical individuals. How are we supporting them to be their fully authentic selves? I also think that a lot of private companies have been on the forefront of this in many ways. They've realized so early on, Adobe is one of them, that in order to have excellence, you have to have diversity. That is sort of at the key of everything, and that's racial and ethnic diversity, ability, diversity of thought, certainly, and diversity of LGBTQ diversity. And Pride actually really enriches the space and makes it more vibrant and exciting to come to, and it brings people together. So I think companies, there's a lot that higher ed can learn from companies, and it's been really interesting to see sort of the shifts within higher education, and how students have really driven so much of this change, which is so exciting.
Yeah, I thanks for mentioning Adobe there, Jiraj. I would just add the way we think about it is we have to be reflective of our customers. And who are our customers? Our customers are diversity, right? It's everybody. So our employee base has to reflect our customers.
I love that. Oh, Tim, go ahead.
And sorry, yeah, I wasn't sure if Brianna was gonna unmute, so I didn't want to cut her off. But I'd like to kind of change course a little bit and answer a slightly different question that I think is still one you asked. But I want to address tokenism. And for those of you who have a non kind of, I guess, like what we consider an American normative identity, you probably will be tokenized at some point in the workplace. And so I want to give you a couple of tools to kind of handle that. So first, I know that it's coming because it will come at some point. And I would say the most important thing when it happens is to understand that it's probably not coming from a malicious place. Again, there may be someone where it is malicious, and I would say that that's kind of a whole different can of worms. But I would say first, recognize that in almost all situations, it's not from a malicious place. It's just from a place of lack of experience, lack of exposure, and lack of education. So that will happen, and I think that that's all right. So first, I typically would say don't address it in the moment. Take some time, think about how you want to respond, and then in particular, make sure you get time one-on-one with this person. But I would say definitely follow up with them, share your experience, share how you felt, because I think, to this point about allyship, if you are getting tokenized in your identity, whatever it may be, that's probably happening. in some other situation, right? And you know, part of allyship is standing up for others and being an active bystander. And this is such an easy way for you to be an active bystander. Pull that person aside, you know, like I said, one-on-one, private space, not around your colleagues, and tell them kind of how it made you feel. I think it's also important to reiterate that, you know, every identity is a whole spectrum of, you know, personality types and interests and perspectives. And so I think it's okay for you to say, you know, don't ask me to speak for the community because I don't think that I can. And I think from that point on, I would say typically people tend to be really kind of have thoughtful responses to that. I think, you know, people are always uncomfortable when they're called out, but I think, you know, as long as you can kind of keep it calm and private, you will probably see a really good response. And so I would recommend definitely addressing it. Don't let it slide.
Yeah, and then just to add to with Tim, I just kind of thought through all of these things when everybody spoke, and I feel like one of the things to not do as well, and I think this is still a thing that I encounter at jobs and I think with friends and with folks too from the outside who don't know me, is they say that I don't appear gay or I don't seem gay, and I think that can be so hurtful. And I think too, when you're like so proud to be who you are, and I just think that it can be tough. And so if I could just pass that on as a piece too, is just don't always assume that gay has kind of this appearance to it, because I just don't think that it does. So.
Yeah, I would just add, I think I love the conversation there around engagement. It's educational for that person, but it does so much more too, right? I will honestly say those end up in some really good friendships. You end up having a genuine conversation that fosters a relationship that builds trust and empathy and fosters a good working relationship, if not a friendship. And then beyond that, again, it just does so much for the community as a whole, to change perceptions, to move beyond stereotype, and to realize that, you know, diversity doesn't make you other than, it just makes you part of, right? We all have our unique attributes, and that's what makes us a wonderful society.
I love that. And we have a wonderful audience question I'd love to ask to follow up on this. Can we talk a little bit more in detail about not addressing something in the moment? You mentioned taking your time to respond. When is a good time to address a problem you noticed? Tim, I believe this is directed to you. That's my guess.
So, okay, so I'll say this. I say that particularly because I tend to be very kind of forthright with my thoughts and opinions in the workplace. And I think, you know, one of the things that I've been trying to do is to like give it time to think it over and see where people are coming from a little bit more. Cause I know, you know, particularly in the heat of the moment, it's very easy to react very quickly. But I would say oftentimes in my experience and in the way I tend to overreact or kind of react, it tends to be an overreaction. And so I would just say, you know, part of the workplace is keeping it really calm and moderated. It's a little bit different from college in that sense, where you really can, I think, have like heated discussions with your peers and cohorts. In the workplace, it needs to be a little bit more like private and calm. And so I think the other thing that taking time allows you to do is to ensure that you've kind of done your homework too. So if you're gonna say, you know, don't let me speak for the LGBTQ community, you can make sure that you have an understanding of, you know, what are all those identities? What do they look like? If you know, assuming you don't know them already, you know, you can really kind of do your homework and make sure that you have a planned out and thoughtful way to approach it. I also know that, you know, the way I phrase things personally, it takes me, you know, a couple of times of thinking about it to put it in language that people can hear. I think oftentimes when we communicate, we're communicating for ourselves to express ourselves rather than communicate ideas in a way that can be heard. And so I think that's kind of the key distinction, why I think taking time is really important.
Thanks, Tim.
I also kind of want to add to, I know people will have different responses to what would be considered a microaggression or something that was either offensive or problematic, I think it's really important for employers and companies and institutions to provide ongoing training for all employees on how best to check your own implicit bias. And because I do sometimes feel like the burden is always put on a marginalized group to sort of have to do the educational work. And so I think as we begin to have stronger, more in-depth conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion that are more than just implicit bias, but that go sort of beyond and unpack some of the complexities that are really needed to have a cohesive work environment for all people. I think sort of leveraging and taking advantage of those opportunities and not having to feel like, oh, the burden's on me to have to teach someone or to call someone out, because there could be a real risk too. And even in the most inclusive spaces, there could be a real risk. I think someone in the comments mentioned, how do you mention this to your boss? And that's so contextual. I don't have a right answer for that. What I can do is I'm very conscientious about the battles I pick and how I think about that. And as I've grown as a professional, I'm strategic about some of the tools that I've been able to use. But I really think it's important to sort of push our employers to be a lot more engaged with the educational piece.
Yeah, you mentioned some keywords there, Draj, that I would mention as well around unconscious bias. And I just want to flip that and say one way to make sure that you're helping our community is to make sure you're checking your own unconscious biases in the way that you talk to other people intentionally, again, not just around the LGBTQ plus community, but ethnicity, race, otherwise. Make sure you're checking your own language. And it encourages others in your circle to do the same things around every community and avoiding those unconscious biases. We had a training on unconscious bias, to your point, Raj, at the company that everybody was required to take. And it was a wonderful education tool. And I agree, I think it's very important for companies to help educate.
What I also love about that is it gives you a common language, and it gives your workplace a common language to have this discourse in a more in-depth way.
Totally agree. Yep.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is you're going to be on the other side of that same conversation at some point in your life too. So, it's okay to be wrong, and it's okay to make mistakes. And I think, don't be hard on yourself for misunderstanding or not having had the right education. But when it's pointed out to you, that's then kind of your directive and your imperative to really follow through on that.
Well, and I think too that that's so true. And I think that you also need to be the person who does kind of that gives that kind of safe space, because I feel that that is too. I mean, that's just such an important piece of this too. Is to feel that as you do have these hard chats. So.
Thank you so much for addressing this audience member's question. I think that we gave a lot of really great insight for them. Within our next 5 minutes before we turn it mostly to just audience questions, I'd love to ask one more question from me to you guys. And just really briefly, because we have a few more minutes, what advice would you give to a young LGBTQ plus professional who is entering their career? In just like a few sentences, what would you say?
I'll be really brief. I think finding a mentor is so critical, and it doesn't necessarily have to be someone from an LGBT background, but finding a mentor and a support system of someone you can really trust and confide in is really critical. My support system is everything to me, and I have different support systems for different things, but it's just critical to my development and growth, people who are my champions and also challenge me as well.
I just want to echo that because Tim in this call right now has offered a lot of mentorship for me personally. And I just want to say that value is incredible and highly recommend find a mentor.
And I would say also, so you're going to hear a lot, and this is, I think, similar to what Draj said, and building your community and finding your mentors. You're going to be pressured a lot to network, and you're going to hear this term a lot because I think it's become kind of a buzzword. So I think I'm going to share a little bit about what networking is and what networking is not. So networking is not getting coffee with someone once and expecting that they'll care about you. It is not you sending them your resume and expecting that they will read it. It is not, trying to reach out. What it is you building a relationship with people. I would approach any mentorship as a potential friendship and as a relationship that should grow and evolve kind of as you grow and evolve in your career. So find and network with people who, you like, who are like-minded, who are doing things that you find, inspiring or exciting. Really spend your networking time in a really targeted way. Think about who you want to work with and why. What shared attributes will they do? Will they advocate for you? Because I think ultimately that's really what you're looking for is advocates. So, I would say networking, a lot of people waste a lot of time with people who won't care and won't advocate for them. So be targeted with that time because that's precious.
Yeah, I love the comments on mentoring and networking. One thing I would add is make sure that you are unapologetically you, that you are yourself, that you are authentic in everything you do. If you ever feel that you're in a position where you need to change who you are to be comfortable, use that networking, use that mentoring to change your circumstance. But don't change your environment, I guess, if you ever feel yourself in that situation where you feel like you have to alter who you are to be comfortable. Change your environment, whatever that means in that situation.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think this is especially for the folks who haven't come out yet. Just don't be too hard on yourself. It does take time, and I think that you just have to be as honest and open with yourself, I think, prior to being able to come out to the world. So
I love that. I'd love to personally thank you guys for your time spending with me. It's really exciting. We can turn over to our audience. We have a wonderful set of questions from pre-submitted as well as live audience questions. And so we're going to turn it over to Dylan McClellan, our Director of Marketing, Molly Whittington, our Director of Outreach, and Nolan Fan, our Director of Finance, to ask questions from the audience. Dylan, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, so I think the first question is kind of directed towards Kelvin here, and it's what is the panel's impression of how well Silicon Slopes is making space and elevating these spaces for queer professionals?
Sorry, my mute wouldn't come off. It's Silicon Slopes. Great question. And I will say Josh James actually is the one of the founders of Omniture. Omniture was acquired by Adobe, which is what brought Adobe to Utah in 2009. And Josh is one of the key contributors to starting up Silicon Slopes. So the question I think is, are they making a difference? Without question, I think if you drive through Silicon Slopes, if you drive down I-15, you've probably seen billboards that are very, very supportive of different marginalized communities in Utah County. Not that that wouldn't be the case in Utah County, but you are seeing that as you drive down I-15. So Silicon Slopes has done a lot, I think, to bring to Utah a very diverse group of people and opportunities for diversity to thrive in Utah, as well as to benefit Utah. I mean, think about the great businesses that have come to Utah because of Silicon Slopes. So hopefully that answers the question.
Great, thank you.
I think it answered it completely.
Wonderful. We'll turn it over to Molly Whittington now. Molly?
Hi, I'm Molly. I'm the Director of Outreach for Out for Business. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. I am asking a question, an audience question from Courtney, and it kind of goes along with pretty much everything we've been saying, but targeted toward Diraj. And the thought in the vein of listening instead of being a know-it-all, kind of. And the question is, how should I ask questions to my LGBTQ plus coworkers about their community to gain a better understanding without sounding offensive or uneducated? And I think that's a great question because we encounter this every day.
I think the core of that has to be trust. And my job is I build relationships with key alumni and donors, and it's not a transactional thing. I don't just go out there and ask for money. It really is building trust, connecting back to what made them excited about being an alumni. Why are they connected to the U? What are their favorite spots on campus? Who are their favorite faculty members? I think I'm really curious about those stories. I think a lot of this could be applied in the same way, is that you're building relationships. And so that trust is really key. I'd say my advice, and it's really echoing what this panel has said, is be authentic to yourself. And when you're sort of asking questions, I think build that relationship so you have the trust before you ask questions. And one of the questions I like is just like, tell me about your experience with X, Y, and Z. That's not a factual question. It's more of a, I want to learn more about you. And then I'm also just gonna once again echo Brianna. Be kind to yourself, because I think that's a lesson that's so hard and it takes time. And not everybody is always so kind to themselves. But I love RuPaul Drag Race, and it reminds me of the RuPaul quote. That's, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? So I think that really does apply here.
Thank you, Dheeraj. Thank you, Molly. We'll have our next question from Nolan. Nolan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Nolan, pronouns he, him, his. And then a question we've had from the audience is, recently there's been research done regarding the impact of the LGBTQ community on organizations. And based on your experience, what would you say about the impact that the LGBTQ community has on an organization's teamwork, diversity, and inclusion?
I'll chime in. I hopefully I'm not repeating myself, but I think I mentioned a little bit earlier Adobe and creativity. As far as contributing to the company, we thrive on creativity, and so the different creative perspectives that are brought to our business through the LGBTQ plus community are phenomenal. And so we just did a company-wide, worldwide RuPaul, or not a RuPaul, but a drag bingo. And so that kind of, it was so fun. We did this worldwide drag bingo just in the middle, not around Pride, just recently. And it's just, the impact is, it is helping people see that there's fun in every community. Every community approaches things differently, and creativity thrives within every community. Hopefully that makes sense.
And I think, to build off of that, I think, similarly, we have a kind of recurring event where we do a drag lotteria with our Hispanic and Latinx ERG. So that, I think those are really great events because they bring two maybe kind of disparate groups together with kind of, to the point I think Draj initiated was, all of your identities are really intersectional. Like when you're coming to the table, you're not just LGBTQIA or something, another letter. You are also, who you are from, where you're from, what your parents are like, what kind of ice cream do you, these are all different kinds of things that will influence the way that you move throughout the world and what you could bring to an environment. So I think as much as you can kind of find intersections, and I think that LGBTQ in particular is great because it is, by virtue of its, of what it is, it's such an intersection. It's, you're going to be interacting with all kinds of people, and those are great, stories and experiences for you to learn from your friends and peers and cohorts, and later on coworkers. And I also think the other thing that you could bring is a completely different perspective. So I think Kelvin touched a little bit on this, but when you come to the workplace, you're going to have a different perspective on your consumer base, on your kind of your audience for the work that you're doing, and that will shape the company strategy and direction and the decisions you make and where you allocate your money. And I think a lot of you will find that your experience will contribute directly to your company's growth. So make sure that you feel comfortable. Well, I would say as much as you are able to feel comfortable sharing your perspective, because I think it's really meaningful.
Wonderful. We'll turn it back to Dylan for our next question.
All right, so the next one I think is a broad question for anyone who wants to answer, but it kind of focuses mainly on Utah. So especially in Utah, much of the talent has a very strong religious feelings on the LGBTQ plus community. Merging the two cultures can be very challenging, especially when both sides are very vocal and outspoken. And the main question I think is, do you have any advice for either side of that conversation, I guess?
I would go back to some of the talking points that we've already hit on about making sure that you're creating a safe space for everyone. When you ask the question, Dylan, and whoever asked from the chat, what came to my mind is a couple of experiences I've had at Adobe, not once, but more than once, because of the safe space that we've created for conversation and finding that intersectionality, finding that common ground. I've had multiple people come and talk to us about personally, grab us and pull us aside and say, I have a daughter who's 16 and she's just come out to me. Or I had another situation where a spouse was coming out to their spouse that they were actually gay. And it made a safe space for someone to come and talk to me or talk to our network about what that meant. And it was very genuine. It was, how can I help? What can I do? What are my resources? So that sense of community allowed me to connect them with resources that would help them through the experience they were having at that point in time.
Well, I think it can be hard too. I mean, especially being in more of a conservative state, I think that it can be tough to sort of navigate this. And I think just being able to not always focus on all of the bad that goes on in each day. And I think especially with what's been going on recently, I think that that's very easy to do. So I think just try and find your just friends and folks who that don't, I think, have the same ideals as you, because I don't think that that's key. I think, but just being able to find that group that you feel the most comfortable with. So.
And then I have another answer that's slightly different. So for those of you who are familiar with marketing and advertising, you may remember the original Volkswagen Beetle ad from 1957, which is a picture of a Beetle and it says lemon underneath, which, you know, at the time, GM was doing all these kind of crazy, you know, ladies with fancy dresses and huge jewels, and it was very, you know, kind of idealistic. So the key to that campaign, which was done by DDB, ironically a Jewish advertising firm, you know, advertising for Volkswagen, which has kind of a checkered past, is a really strong insight. And what that insight was it's an honest car. So they were going to talk about the product honestly. And I think you can use this kind of thinking when you're interacting with colleagues who think differently or have different perspectives from you, or, you know, because I think a lot of times you will, at the forefront, you know, of your conversation, it will seem like an impenetrable wall. But I think what you'll find is when you start to kind of delve deeper for that further insight, and I think that insight is really about human nature, what are our core shared values? What can we actually connect on? Because I think you'll find you have more in common than you may initially expect. And I think what you can do with that kind of found shared core value, once you communicate them, is use that as your access point. So if you think about when there's a crack in a dam, all water needs is a crack to basically tear down the dam. And you need to just find your crack to basically bring down the dam. And I think you will all find that, because I think you'll have shared values with a lot of the people who you are surrounded by.
I like that idea around shared values. For me, I think I fully recognize, and especially when I'm working with donors or external relations, that I'm not going to be all things to all people. There'll be people I really connect with, and there'll be others that are put off for one reason. And so I just try to find folks that I can connect with, and we have some sort of authentic connection. So I liked what you said, Tim, just finding that crack of shared commonality, because I think there's absolutely a lot of that.
Wonderful. We'll move on to our next question from Molly.
Awesome. So we had a really interesting and awesome audience question. And this is, I think, directed towards Rihanna. So here, how do I respond and act civilly towards an individual who doesn't respect my authority because of my sexuality? Part 2 of this question, or as an employee whose supervisor doesn't respect my sexuality.
Yeah, and I think that that's so tough because, I mean, for me, I feel like I've been caught in those spots, and I think that you just have to confront those folks very calmly. I feel like I am the type of person that I have overreacted in those types of chats with folks, and I just feel like that isn't going to do anybody any good. And I feel like too, I mean, I had been in a job when I was younger, and I had a boss who I could tell just did not support who I was. And I think just being as honest as you can with yourself about that. And I actually ended up quitting that job, and that was probably the best thing that I ever did for myself. So while that can be hard, I just think that you need to be able to just be as open and honest with yourself. And I think too, and if things do get that bad, I actually had to go to HR. It was this whole thing. And, but in the end, I just felt like it was best for me to move on and to not give my energy to that, to like the company anymore. And to that team that I didn't feel like I was ever a part of, just like a part of, and I just feel like that can be so tough. But I just think, yeah, just being as open and honest, and just being able to understand that there are folks out there who are going to be there for you.
Thank you. We're running short on time, but we have some really phenomenal final questions we want to ask really quick before we close out. Nolan, would you like to ask the first one?
Yep, so one of the last questions is, if any of you were discouraged at times with initial acceptance in the workplace, what helped you get through that discouragement?
So I had a kind of experience with this. And I think, no matter what you give to some people, you're going to get a specific kind of reaction. And I think, as everyone has been saying, you really need to find the people in your corner and your advocates and lean into those, because there are going to be people who will not be in your corner. And you can come to someone with all the data and story, like the right data, the right story in the world, and it's just not going to be heard. And I think that's when you get really creative with how you do stuff. So if you can't get things done through maybe what the obvious channel is, find someone else who can do it for you, because and help them get there. I think you don't let kind of your personal challenges with someone get in the way of what you believe is the right thing to do, because there's always going to be a way. I think just kind of how you find that way is the challenge.
Yeah, I would maybe just add, I'm going to go back to getting over the discouragement, I think was the question, Nolan. And one way to do that is to give back, to find, it kind of goes along the same theme of finding your network, but give back, be involved with people who you're helping in your community, whether it's at work or outside of work. But that's going to give you, I find, or it gives me, energy, it gives me hope, it gives me encouragement, it helps me overcome those challenges, because you're finding like-minded people by surrounding yourselves and giving back to your community.
Perfect. We're going to ask our final question from Dylan and then wrap up really quickly.
Yeah, so our last question is, as an ally, how do you apologize sincerely when you make a misstep in your implicit bias or language when interacting with an LGBTQ+ individual?
Acknowledge it. Don't apologize for yourself.
Be genuine. Don't make sure you're not doing it as a token. Make sure you're doing it genuinely. That'll come across.
I think I mentioned this before, but just listen. I mean, if you're apologizing and then going on and on and on about why you're so apologetic, and not really listening as to what you did, it just isn't helpful. It's not about intent. It really is about impact, and that is such a key point, that it may have had a negative impact on someone. And so your job is not to convey your intent. Your job is to understand the impact you made.
Yeah, and I think just being open to the feedback.
That's a great question to end on. And unfortunately, we are running out of time, even though we could have this conversation for a long time. I just want to share how grateful we all are for you guys, all our panelists here, spending this hour, as well as our wonderful audience. And hopefully, whether you identify as LGBTQ+ or as an ally, you've gained some insight or affirmation and takeaways that you can take back to your workplaces to make them more welcoming. I'd also like to thank Lizzie Porter, our co-director of events, as well as Megan Kawaguchi from the Alumni Relations Office for running the technical backend for this great event. Christy, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. I also want to say thank you to everyone. Just a quick thank you because Ryan covered most of it. If anyone wants to learn more about Out for Business, students can visit our Instagram page at Out for Business, and alumni can email Megan to learn more. Megan's just from the alumni office. Next, we have passport points for any business scholars who join, so you can get credit for being here. And thank you all again.